In today's world, we are increasingly dependent on technology. Our business and personal lives rely on it, but as you've probably noticed, it's unreliable. They promise it'll get better, but it usually gets worse. Our computers are slow, so we end up squinting at smartphones and tablets. We live in constant fear that something's going to happen to our personal data, so we're scared into paying for fake protection that proves useless when disaster strikes. Update attacks, fake Wi-Fi, cloud control, and other industry scandals are designed to keep the money flowing. The jokers we pay to fix our stuff have no clue what they're doing, so they do a virus scan and then wipe out our precious photos. Intelligent, successful people feel intimidated by the chaos and think it's somehow their fault. If they only knew what the industry was doing to them, they'd get torches and pitchforks. If only we had someone to explain it all in plain English so we can start protecting ourselves. Oh wait, we do! It's the Computer Exorcist Podcast with your host, Marc Anthony Arena.
From the Wallace Memorial microphone in my home office overlooking the Can of Worms in downtown Rochester, New York, this is the Computer Exorcist Podcast. My name is Marc Anthony Arena. I am so thrilled you are joining me today. As always, please and thank you. Tell your friends about my show. And also want to give a shout out to Grape. I attended one of their meetings for the first time this morning. And boy, did they get up early, but it's just a phenomenal organization. It stands for Greater Rochester Association for the Protection of the Elderly. And it is a club for professionals who serve senior citizens in any way. So, of course, what I do, when people ask me what I do when I was there, I said, look, I spent the past 15 years doing one-on-one tech support for seniors, and I hope to spend the rest of my career giving speeches, explaining online scams to seniors and those who care for them. But you had all sorts of people there. There were people who do cleaning out your house when you move to a nursing home. There was one guy who invented a shower. It's like a handle that stays above you. So if someone has to help you shower, then they can use that so they don't have to use one of their arms to hold the shower head. And I forgot to tell them about last week's episode with the scammer and the shower. Anyway, so that's that. But yeah, if you are in Rochester and do anything related to senior citizens, certainly check out Grape. We're going to jump right in here. As they say on Minnow Pond. This is interesting. I've got a couple of articles. The first two articles I have are from a couple years ago. And yes, I'm backlogged with the articles, but that actually gives us an interesting, unique perspective on things. Because we can look at these articles and say, oh yeah, that's what they were saying a couple years ago. And we can say, well, that's what actually happened. This is what they were saying. This is what actually happened. And it's just interesting to see. It's just like watching those 80s dystopian movies. Although, in that case, they pretty much came true. All right. July 2021. Autoblog.com. Promises why plans for an all-electric future are wildly premature. Recently, the questions go like this. So I read that General Motors is going to stop making gasoline cars. Seemingly every week now, another automaker shoots up a hand to pledge good green intentions. Like a front row students seeking a teacher's praise or a gold star from the media and from Wall Street. Here's where things get tricky. I do believe that would be a wonderful thing, but I'm not gonna lie. The promises automakers are floating are wildly premature. Joe Biden's own goals call for $174 billion in public spending to support EV adoption, with everything from consumer rebates to 500,000 new public chargers. The goalposts for these supposed conversions include 2025 for an all-electric Jaguar. In other words, their whole lineup is electric. And 2030 for Cadillac and Volvo. 2030 is when the UK insists it will ban sales of new gasoline and diesel cars. That's ironic because diesel is incredibly efficient. The promises become grander and hazier. After that, 2035, no more gasoline or diesel passenger models in GM showrooms with a dispensation for heavy-duty trucks. Now, I'm not saying automakers are fibbing exactly, but goalposts have a way of moving. Cans get kicked down the road, especially when they bang into a wall of stubborn consumers. Right? Yeah, you gotta control them. The consumers need to be controlled. They need to be reined in. They need to be controlled and nudged. Right? It's that classic condescension that this industry has. Models that remain prohibitively expensive, despite encouraging progress, reducing battery costs, limited driving range, and public charging that's rarely where you want it. And the elephant in the studio apartment, a near blackout of charging options for big city dwellers and apartment renters everywhere, right? You're going to go park in a parking lot somewhere or park in the street, and you just can't charge. That being said, I've seen a couple electric charging stations installed in a few apartment complexes, and in suburban ones anyway, with real parking lots. And they've only dipped their toes in, they've only put a couple of them in. They certainly won't be free. They'll charge you per kilowatt hour, so you'll put your credit card in just like anything else, and they'll bill you, and they'll probably make a profit on it. So just like your laundry machines, they're going to make a profit on you there. So, side note, during the beginning of the Biden administration, I personally invested into a ton of lithium stocks. I mean, probably only a couple grand total, but probably 5 or 10 lithium stocks that I read up on, and they're all down. And I was surprised to see that, but they're all down. Apparently the explanation was they did a little overproduction, right? And as we're going to talk about in this article, the EV adoption expectation was that everyone's going to have electric vehicles by 2025. And here we are now, 1 month away from 2025, and that's nowhere near the case. So what happened was those lithium companies actually have a surplus. They overmined and overproduced, and so now they have a surplus of lithium batteries. So that's interesting. I mean, it was a good explanation, right? Nothing catastrophic happened to my stocks. It's just, hey, look, they're down because they produced more than they needed. They expected more people would be buying the batteries by now. But I think in the long run, I mean, a lot of things are going regular hybrid or plug-in hybrid. Again, plug-in hybrid makes sense because then you got the electric efficiency, but you don't have the range anxiety problem, right? You can go on a road trip. You got your electric power for when you're within your city, and you can go home and charge at night. But if you want to go on a road trip, great. You got an engine, you got a gas tank. Great. Makes total sense. So those include educated, high-income professionals who would love to own an EV, but feel cut out of the game. Solving the charging conundrum alone will require a Marshall Plan level of spending. They figure $300 billion investment to support EVs at those projected levels that they claim by 2030. So $300 billion worldwide, or $50 billion in America, would be needed to install those charging things. And look, hey, side note, why does the government have to do this, right? If these are going to be profitable, I know a guy I met a couple of years ago, and he's going around installing these charging stations, because guess what? You'll have to put your credit card in, right? It's just like gas stations, except you can install one almost anywhere. You stick one in any parking lot, and someone who owns a plaza, stick one in that parking lot, and bam, you make money. So I don't see a reason why government needs to get involved in that. Maybe to push things a little bit, but that's all artificial, right? Whenever you push something artificially, it doesn't work out. Just go with the flow. But yeah, if I had the time and money, I would invest in some chargers, and I would do it, and it would be profitable eventually. It would be an investment. Okay. They say the roughly 100 new EV models expected in showrooms by 2025. All right, again, here we are a month away from 2025, and there's maybe a handful of EV models. Every brand has maybe one model at this point. There are not 100 new EV models for sure. The original Nissan Leaf still holds America's annual sales record for any non-Tesla EV. Okay, and if Americans were so fired up over EVs, that one legacy automaker, then one of them would have scored a genuine sales hit by now with anything at all, anything better than the 2014 Nissan Leaf. And that record was only 30,000 units sold. And they said the impressive Ford Mustang Mach-E should break that record. And I'm pretty sure they have by now. I haven't checked it. But a couple things. I think it's a sacrilege that they call it a Mustang. It's an SUV. Okay, I like Ford. I like their cars. I rented 2 different Fords this year, actually, and I like them a lot. And my brother had one that was incredibly, uncanny reliable. It was 15 years, and it was just phenomenal. But stop calling it a Mustang. That's sacrilege, and it's a dishonor and a disservice to the Mustang heritage. It's an SUV that happened to, it would have looked good on its own, except they had to graft the Mustang headlights and taillights onto it, so it looks very ugly. Anyway, so that's interesting. So the Ford Mustang Mach-E should break the Leaf's record if Ford can pry enough units away from Europe, where regulatory demands are more urgent. Okay, so apparently they're selling more of these Mach-Es over in Europe where they have to because the regulations are coming in sooner. But even, say, 40,000 units is a pittance versus the 400,000 annual sales of Toyota RAV4. Okay, great. And he says that still they've never had any non-Teslas break the 100,000 mark. In some ways, it's hard to blame them. An industry that was seen as a low-margin dead end suddenly has a bright future. So every automaker is adopting the playbook of Tesla and startups. Story stock promises, right? Like Fisker. I was all in favor of Fisker. Henrik Fisker designed cars for BMW and Aston Martin. Then he went on to create his own automaker called Fisker Automotive. It went out of business 10 years ago. And then he decided to come out with another one and call that one Fisker. And that fell apart recently. I invested a couple $100 in it and lost it. So that fell apart. Now, interesting, another side note, if you look on YouTube, there's these car dudes on YouTube who are buying these abandoned Fiskers, right? So all these people bought these Fisker Ocean SUVs, and they looked great and everything. But a couple things. Number one, now you can't find parts because Fisker fell apart. So Fisker owners are buying up any kind of spare parts they can possibly find, windshields and stuff like that. The other problem is these are evil computers, and they relied on an evil cloud service. So now that that's all shut down, people have to figure out how to use these things without the evil cloud service controlling them. So it's going to be kind of difficult, right? Because again, it's all the ecosystem. They're not selling you a product. They're selling you an ecosystem of convenient services. Okay, back on track, Mark. So GM's mere announcement that it would snuff out gasoline cars 14 years from now lifted the stock by 4%. Okay. That all EV promise? Well, it's more like a goal. Okay. What do we have next? This is WallStreetJournal.com, 17th of December, 2020. Toyota's chief says electric vehicles are overhyped. Akio Toyoda says converting entirely to EVs could cost hundreds of billions of dollars and make cars unaffordable for average people. That's what's happening, right? All these EVs that are coming out, even with the government rebates, they're still prohibitively expensive. Oh, and by the way, 10 years from now, if your battery dies, you're done. You just, yes, it's simple. Yes, there's only one part. Battery's pretty much the only part inside the car. But when that goes, that's it. You put the whole thing in the garbage. Or you LS swap it, of course. Car guys will know what I'm talking about. LS swap means you buy an engine from Chevy and you swap it in there and call it a day. You got another car. You got a working car. So Toyota's leader criticized what he described as excessive hype over electric vehicles. What did we just say a few minutes ago? Saying advocates failed to consider the carbon emitted by generating the electricity, right? And look, if you're on social media and you say that, you'll get shot down, right? If you're trying to bring that reality to light and say, hey, by the way, where are we getting all this power to propel these electric cars? People will shoot you down and say you're stupid. But luckily, this guy said it. He's got enough credibility and visibility that he could say that. Oh, and by the way, the cost of an EV transition. Especially, here's something really important too. If you know me, I watch Harry's Garage on YouTube. He's a car dude. He's got a bunch of exotic cars and he drives them and explains them. And Harry made up a great point. He said, look, that's great. He goes, look, EVs are great. That's fine. That's okay if you want to do them. That's great. He said, but why would you take perfectly good cars and throw them in the garbage? He said, the real environmental impact comes from manufacturing these things. He said, look, if you've got a car that's 10, 20 years old and you're keeping it alive, that's really environmentally friendly, okay? Look, I told y'all, I personally have a 20-year-old Chrysler. It's a 2004 Chrysler, and it's incredibly reliable. I barely have to put any parts into it. It's incredibly fuel efficient. And look, versus me putting it in the garbage every year, Rochester people love putting their car in the garbage every year, right? They abuse a car, they lease it for a year or 2 or 3, and they beat the pants off of it, trash it, and then hand it in and let someone else deal with it, right? Buying cars, manufacturing them, then putting them in the garbage every couple of years, that is the environmental hazard. And that was Harry's point there. So I will keep, and I've said this before, I said this on the episode a couple of weeks back where we talked to the lady who made cassette tapes, right? Keeping your car alive is what matters. So, another really interesting thing, so what Harry's saying is, look, fine, if you want to make EVs, go ahead and do it in the future, but don't tell people to rush to throw all their cars in the garbage, just like the Cash for Clunkers program, right? Those cars were perfectly fine, and you put them in the garbage, and then you have to manufacture new ones. Again, that's the real problem. So keep rolling with what you got, and then sure, whatever comes down the road, fine. So another thing that Toyota President Akio Toyoda said is Japan would run out of electricity by that summer of 21 if all cars were running on electric power right away. He said the infrastructure needed to support a fleet of EVs would cost Japan between 14 trillion and 37 trillion yen, which is the equivalent of 135 to 358 billion dollars. Okay? And yeah, okay, that's not just charging points, right? That's not just chargers that I was talking about where you and I could invest in a charging station and make money off of it, right? Like a snack machine. But also, think about the power plants that would be necessary. That would take some massive, massive investment, and that couldn't be done by just normal people like you and me. And by the way, Japan, how's your nuclear power plant life going there? How'd that work out? So there's that. I think Toyota and once in a while BMW will talk about hydrogen-powered engines, right? Where it's similar to a regular gas-powered engine, except you pour liquid hydrogen into it. And they're trying to do that because then you just fill up at the pump and it's 2 minutes, as opposed to the 40 or 80 or 90 minute charge, whatever it might be for your electric car. And again, I think that'll eventually be solved, but yeah, his point is, hey, let's look into hydrogen, and maybe there's a future in that instead. And also, he obviously likes the hybrids, right? Even if Toyota's saying, look, we can't do the all-electric cars right away because it would tax our power system greatly, we'd run out of power. But the hybrids to him make sense, right? Because sure, you got the battery, but by the way, you're generating power mostly from gasoline, okay? The only time you're pulling from the grid is if you're plugging it in, if it's a plug-in hybrid. But yeah, Toyota certainly likes those because they're selling a lot of those, and I believe they said much of their lineup will become hybridized, and that's a more realistic outlook, folks. Is, hey, look, let's do hybrids first before we get involved in full EV. Yeah, the plug-in hybrid makes sense from a consumer standpoint, like I said a few minutes ago. The only problem is it ultra complexifies it, because now you got a battery that could die at any time, and depending on the wiring, you can't just bypass it when it dies. It all depends. Certain models you can bypass it, certain models you can't. So it just ultra complexifies these cars so that, guess what? It's not worth it for you to repair them, and you put the car in the garbage. Again, that's the hazard here. And this is something, again, that the computer industry loves. Okay, so the auto industry learned that from the computer industry of, we're going to make tons of money by artificially designing our products deliberately to die sooner. Okay, final article. This one comes from our dear listener T-Bone. Thanks so much for listening and for sending me this article. This is a modern one from August 2024, New York Times. The Corvette's revival doesn't ensure success for electric versions. Many fans of the GM sports cars say they aren't interested in switching from gas pumps to charging stations. Sales of sports cars have been steadily declining for about 3 decades, but there's been one exception to that trend. The Corvette has recently stormed back to near-record popularity. The Corvette must now slalom around a trickier obstacle, transitioning to electrified lineup. GM sold 53,785 of these 8th-generation Corvettes worldwide last year, and that was just 22 cars shy of its top sales year in 1979. Shoot. Man, 22 cars. Man, they should have just called some people and said, come on, let's push it over the edge. Let's do this. Americans bought about 34,000 of those. And the car starts at $66,000, which is absolutely incredible. It's an incredible bargain. Like, I love a bargain and everything. It would be a bargain even at 70 or 80. I mean, it's a mid-engine sports car, folks. So that's the difference with the 8th generation one. After 7 decades as a classic front-engine 2-seater car, Chevrolet moved the V8 behind the passengers, so it's called a mid-engine design, where the engine is behind you. That's typically associated with supercars from Ferrari or Lamborghini. So, a marketing research company said the Corvette's more exotic recent design and relatively affordable prices and unapologetic attitude has driven its success. The Corvette sales gains have bucked a trend of American drivers moving away from cars, especially sports cars, right, and toward SUVs. And I get it. SUVs are useful, but I have an SUV for winter, and I can carry large things in the hatch and all that. But I love a sports car. Okay, I have the Chrysler as my mileage beater, right? Because I drive a ton, so I try to put the mileage on that because it's my cheapy car. But man, I've fallen in love with it. Bought it as a beater, but I just fell in love with it. But anyway, sports cars are in my blood. I got sports cars, and if you have the time and space and money, it's a glorious thing. So, two-door cars like the Audi TT and the Mercedes SLK have disappeared. Toyota's Supra, which was reborn in around 2020, sold fewer than 2,700 cars last year. And that was actually smart. They did a joint venture with BMW. So Toyota calls it the Supra, BMW calls it the Z4. But here's the important thing, is that they shared the research and development costs because it would not be worthwhile for either of them individually to develop a new sports car. So that's really cool. They shared the R&D costs so they can make that happen because these sports cars are such low volume. So, where are we? Sales of what the industry calls enthusiast cars have fallen by half in this century since 2000. They've fallen down to 223,000 cars last year, so that's too bad. The Ford Mustang, which racked up sales of 120,000 cars in 2015, managed fewer than 59,000 cars last year. And GM retired the Camaro, and Stellantis has retired the Dodge Challenger. But that being said, they're bringing another Dodge sports car out pretty soon, so that's not really totally accurate. Okay. people are Daniel Pund, who's the editor of Road and Track. He's been with them forever. He's been a journalist forever. He's awesome. He said people are scared to drive a small, low car when everything else is a tall SUV. And look, I had a little tiny Subaru Impreza Outback Sport that I traded in around 2015 because I was doing a lot of large road trips on the thruway, and it's all-wheel drive, but it was still very tiny and I didn't feel safe. That being said, I'm okay with the Chrysler Sebring because, yeah, it's low to the ground, but it's a very long car. So I feel totally safe in it on the thruway, at least in the summer. So, but yeah, I get it. They don't like small cars and low cars, right? I would totally buy a Lotus because those are exotic cars for like 40 grand. They're incredible value, but they're really tiny. Like, yeah, they're low to the ground, but they're English cars, and they're really small, and they don't really work on our throughways. Okay. This is something interesting. Taj Yuktur, who's retiring as the 5th Corvette chief engineer since the 1953 beginning of it. It's kind of like the Pope, right? He's the 5th Pope of the Corvettes, the 5th leader of the Corvette since it started. He said the median age of the buyer has been rising by roughly 1 year every year, topping out at age 64. He knew that was unsustainable. He said it was a comfortable car for our traditional customers, but you're not going to sell a lot of them when they become 100 years old. And so I get that. And he says a mid-engine Corvette, which GM engineers have been talking about since the 60s, was meant to shake things up, including a design that could support future hybrid vehicles. So they built that idea into the architecture of this new 8th generation. Some people at GM got cold feet, and he remembers a strong push to offer both the C7 and the C8 concurrently in showrooms. And I actually thought that'd be a good idea, because your traditional people can go for the 7th generation with the front engine. A lot of boomers I talk to at a lot of car shows, and my dad included, say, yeah, you know what, I don't know, I much prefer last year's model with the front engine. I don't like that whole mid-engine thing. So yeah, I think that would have been a good idea to sell them concurrently, and it would keep their factory humming along and avoid alienating those loyalists. But executives said that when we offer the 8th generation, we just won't sell any of those old ones. So the mid-engine car was controversial, but in hindsight, it's brilliant. Its median buyer age went from 64 down to 55 over the past few years. So they hope to build on that momentum he said that they don't think of it as something radical, they just think of it as the next Corvette. And again, I think what helps it is the fact that they've been talking about a mid-engine Corvette forever. If you go to the Corvette Museum in Kentucky, I highly recommend it. It is phenomenal. I mean, I'm just a car guy I love cars of all kinds, and the Corvette Museum does not disappoint. And you'll see a lot of their prototypes from 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s where they did a mid-engine prototype, and they're all really cool. So it's not a surprise. It's not radical, really. We knew it was coming. GM hopes to build on that momentum with an expanded lineup that includes the Corvette E-Ray. And I thought to myself, that sounds eerily similar. What is E-Ray? And, it builds on the word stingray, right? It's just a play on the word stingray. But the reason why it sounds familiar is because of the brand Sea Ray. There's a boat brand called Sea Ray. So I don't know if they were doing that on purpose, but people like when things rhyme. So it works. So the Corvette E-Ray, it's a Stingray that's electrified. It's the first hybrid version of the model, and it's one of the first hybrid version of a sports car. Porsche will follow next year with the hybrid 911. Moving the V8 behind the seats improves the acceleration and handling by keeping more weight in the center. I can attest to that because I test drove a first generation Boxster from Porsche, and the engine is right behind the seats, and it does. It really, really helps the turning and all that. It also clears room in front of the hood for an electric motor. Okay, so you have a 495 horsepower V8 behind you, and then a 160 horsepower electric motor system in front of you. That's a total of 655 horse. The result is the fastest ever Corvette with 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds. Okay, and allows it to be more efficient with so on and so forth. But it's more efficient per the horsepower. but it's still not as efficient as the prior year's Corvette that isn't a hybrid, okay? So here's the point, and Harry's Garage also brings this up. He says, look, you're out there patting yourself on the back for making a hybrid, and the government applauds you for making a hybrid, right? But you're just ticking the box that said it's hybrid. It's still not as efficient, right? If you're doing a sports car with a zillion horsepower, oh, and by the way, it's a hybrid, right? So the pea-brains in government are applauding you, but they don't realize it's not at all more efficient, okay? It's not your Toyota Prius where it's more efficient than its counterpart, right, than a similarly equipped Corolla or something. No, so they're saying, yes, it's more efficient because it's 24 miles per gallon, versus 25 for a standard Stingray without the electric motor. Okay, fine. So yeah, it's 1 mile per gallon less. And I get it. Again, it's more efficient per horsepower, right? It's definitely more efficient than a gasoline-powered car of 655 horse, right? It certainly is, but it's not more efficient in general, okay? If you were going to buy a regular Stingray versus the E-Ray, you're buying the E-Ray and you're going down 1 mile per gallon, okay? You are going to pay a little price there. It is less efficient, okay? So that's what Harry's Garage is saying is, look, folks, these aren't efficient, okay? They're hybrids so that they can check a box so the government applauds them, but that's it. So they said eventually they'll offer an electric Corvette in the future, but they haven't done any details there yet, okay? Porsche intends to do replace its slow-selling gasoline-powered Boxster and Cayman models with electric versions next year. And that's interesting because they Boxster and Cayman used to be a straight six engine. Then a couple years ago, they decided, all right, we're going to do turbocharged 4 cylinders to make it more efficient. Okay, great, fine. You know, that's not terrible. I've driven a lot of Turbo 4 European sports cars, and they're pretty fun. But the purists said, look, we can't do this. So Porsche brought back the straight six engine for a while. But apparently they're saying that they're going to just get rid of all that and do electric next year for those. So look, they are slow selling for whatever reason. I think it's just the price, to be honest. The original Porsche Boxster was very reasonably priced, especially if you get it a year or two old. I remember about 10 years ago, I could have gotten a used one for $2,000, and I am kicking myself because at the time I just bought a house and I didn't want to push my luck and all that, so I was being frugal, but still, $2,000 I could have gotten a Porsche Boxster for. The new ones, though, over the past decade, the brand new ones, they're 70, 80 grand, 80 or more usually, so that's why they aren't selling. They're no longer a bargain, okay? I mean, I would much rather have a Porsche Boxster, but I can get a Corvette for 20 grand less, and it's going to have a lot more horsepower, so that's the real reason why those aren't selling, okay? A survey of American car owners said 56% were absolutely not interested in an electric vehicle, which was actually up from 51% the year before. So that's interesting. So half the people weren't interested, and now it's actually a lot more than half aren't interested in electric vehicles. And that went up to 60% for Corvette owners. They're not interested in a fully electric car. So Chevrolet appears wise to keep offering gas hybrid and then eventually an optional electric Corvette. Hey, that's cool. Just whatever you do, guys, don't make a Corvette SUV. That would just be, in the short term, you'd make a few bucks selling some SUVs, but just like Ford did, it would destroy the heritage of your sports car, so please don't. Mr. Edwards added that while GM electric cars were often impressive, the company had often fumbled their introductions, and GM has not done enough to persuade many of its customers to consider the new technology. They need to create the bridge from where they are to where customers are going to be. Historically, GM has not done a good job of understanding how to talk to future and current consumers without ticking everyone off. That's true. They're real good at that. They're real good at coming out with something and implementing it wrong. By the way, it was the Chevy Bolt. I think it was the EUV edition of the Chevy Bolt. GM already came out and said, hey, you know what? So, when your batteries die in that car 10 years from now, sorry, too bad. We're not going to make them anymore. Sorry, too bad. All right. And again, I'm hoping this is like laptop batteries where I can just go get a third-party knockoff battery and put it in there for dirt cheap. Because, hey, you got nothing to lose, right? So who knows? Maybe I'll start buying people's dead EVs in a couple of years and either LS swapping them or putting in a dirt cheap Chinese laptop battery. But yeah, so they're real good at ticking everyone off, including all the people who just purchased that Bolt EUV. Mr. Yuchter said that the Corvette, with its cultural familiarity and all-American image, could be an ambassador for electrification. That may be especially helpful in the Midwest and the South, where the Corvette has a devoted following and electric vehicles are not as popular as they are on the coasts. In other words, they're stupid hicks and shame on you, and we don't know why they don't like an electric car, because too bad for you, they're stupid hicks. Actually, there are people who make their living with mechanical engines and fixing things and want cars that are repairable, so I don't blame them. And shame on the author for looking down on them in a cloaked way at the end there. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and hope you have a great week, and we'll come back next week. I'm going to have a couple special guests coming up, and thecomputerexorcist.com to find out more. If you want to do this for a living, if you want to protect senior citizens from scams for a living and save them tons of money as well on their normal tech bills, then you can go to becomeanexorcist.com to find out more. Talk to you next week. It's all